Hello everyone, in this video we're going to talk about Cells Lecture 4 where we discuss several functions and roles of ATP and how it works in the body. So the first question that we want to focus on is what is ATP and what is its role in the cell? So ATP is an energy molecule that provides energy for your cell. It's kind of a small molecule and it releases energy really fast so that, let's say when you're exercising, as in this picture, and you need a lot of energy really fast and you're not eating at the moment, all those sugar that's stored in your body is going to come out and then go through cellular respiration and make ATP so that you can have that energy to power your cells. So that's ATP. The next question is, so ATP is a form of energy, right? And the reason why we talk about it is because sugar and fat and all the other molecules that provide you energy cannot release energy fast enough for your body. They're used, right? We eat them because they do provide energy for our body, but all those other forms of energy have to be converted into ATP in order to actually be used in the cells and power whatever activity that goes on in the cell. So the next question is, what are the three parts of an ATP? If you look at this picture right here, you can see the three parts of an ATP. We have adenine, so ATP is called adenosine triphosphate because it has a group called adenine. It's just a name that you have to remember. And then it has a ribose, which is a sugar, a five carbon sugar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So a ribose is a sugar. That's also a part of ATP. And the last part of ATP, which we'll focus a lot more on, is called a phosphate group. And actually ATP has, remember, 3 phosphate groups, okay? 1, 2, and 3. As you notice in this picture that there are a lot of negative charges on each one of these phosphate groups. So as we mentioned in class, when we put those phosphate groups together, it's kind of like squeezing little kids onto one bus seat and they do not want to sit there. They don't want to be so close together. So why is this happening to ATP? It's because of all those negative charges. Those oxygen have negative charges because it has extra electrons on there. And if you can remember, electrons, because they have negative charges and similar charges repel each other, those negative charges really want to be broken apart. So in order to hold all those negative charges together, this ATP itself holds a lot of energy. And when those 2 phosphate groups on one side that's close to the ribose and the last phosphate group, when the bond between the second phosphate group and the third phosphate group, when this bond breaks, there's a lot of energy being released because that's strain on putting all those negative charges together. That is no longer happening. So when we break the bond, we're releasing a lot of energy for ATP. So if you look at the next question, where is energy stored in the molecule of ATP? It would be the bonds between the phosphate groups. So as you can see right here, right, we have 3 phosphate groups. There are bonds in between each one of the phosphate groups. And when we break that bond, we release energy. So the energy itself is actually stored inside of this bond. Okay. The next question is, what is the difference between ATP and ADP? Just from the name itself, ATP is adenosine triphosphate and ADP is adenosine diphosphate. So the most basic difference is that ATP has 3 phosphate groups, as you can see right here, and ADP, which is right here, only has 2 phosphate groups. And then another difference, which is even more important, is that ATP, since we're squeezing all 3 phosphate groups together, ATP holds a lot of energy, and ADP doesn't hold nearly as much energy. So the next question says, which one has more energy? ATP has more energy and is similar to a charged battery. So if you remember this picture that we look at, when we put ADP and phosphate groups together in order to make ATP, the ATP is like the charged battery that holds a lot of energy. And then the next one is, which one holds less energy? ADP is like the dead battery, doesn't have as much energy. But if we put ADP and another phosphate groups together, then you make ATP that has a lot of energy. But if you go from ATP to ADP, then we will release a lot of energy. So how do you actually remember this? Just remember the name. Think about what ATP stands for and what ADP stands for, and you'll know that when we break the bond, we release energy, and in order to form the bond, we have to have an input of energy. We have to, require energy, okay? So the next question is, where'd it go? Which one, well, we already did this. What is the difference between heterotrophs and autotrophs, and how do they each obtain energy? So this picture shows you an autotroph is any organism that makes its own food. So it doesn't have to be a plant. It could be a fungi. It could be some bacteria as well. So anything that can make its own food, we can call it an autotroph. A heterotroph is anything that cannot make its own food, and it has to depend on other organisms in order to obtain energy and use that energy. So autotrophs obtain energy through sunlight or other types of chemicals. But in the end, autotrophs makes its own food from whatever energy that it can harvest directly from the outside environment without having to consume some sort of food that's already, a macromolecule. It doesn't need to consume macromolecule. It makes its own macromolecules, such as sugar. Heterotrophs, however, has to either eat autotrophs or eat other types of heterotrophs in order to obtain energy. The next question is, explain where plants get the energy they need to produce food. Sunlight, of course. Remember from today's class, light comes into photosystem 2, electrons get excited. So the sunlight that comes in to photosystem 2, to the plant, is used, and that energy is transformed into the electrons, okay? The energy in the electrons. But in the end, plants get energy from sunlight. Obviously, sunlight has a lot of energy. It's not the heat. The heat is a different type of energy. It's a chemical energy. We can transform the energy in the sunlight into a chemical energy that can be used to make sugar. The next one is, when would your body produce more ATP, when you're sleeping or when you're exercising? Obviously, when you're exercising, because that's when you require more energy, and ATP is the molecule that has a lot of energy. There's a question that I forgot to answer. What are consumed, or what are the reactants, and what are the products of photosynthesis? So sunlight is not exactly a reactant, but it is the energy that's needed to allow photosynthesis to happen. So I think at this point you guys are pretty good at the reactants and products, but let's talk about it one more time. Water has to be consumed for photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide, which is CO2, also needs to be consumed. So those are the two things that are going into the reaction, the overall reaction we're talking about. And what are produced? Oxygen is produced, and then glucose or sugar is produced, okay? So you can write either one on the test and it will be counted as correct. The next question is question 13. What would happen to a plant if you leave it out of the sunlight for a few days? Because plants make sugar in the sun, it also stores that sugar during the day, right? So that when the plant does not have any more sunlight at night, the plant is still alive, right? The cells are still alive. The cells can still make more ATP. The cells can make more ATP because the cells are using the glucose, the sugar that's stored in the body of the plant in order to make ATP. Same thing as our human body, right? We're not eating all the time. We're not consuming energy all the time, but when we're not eating, we're still fine, we're still alive, because whatever energy that's stored in our body can be used, okay? So if you leave a plant out of the sunlight for a few days, it should still be alive, but if you leave it out of the sun for too long, then it will definitely be dead, because without sunlight, there's no sugar produced. Without sugar produced, you wouldn't use the sugar to make ATP. Without ATP, everything's dead. And the next question is on the video that's already made for you guys, so you can watch that again as a review for yourself. Have a good day.